And now, it's time for TJwow.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where in the world you are, and also when you are coming back to this training journal recording. Welcome to our session. We are really glad to have you here. This is me. I am Jo Cook, that's my name. I'm the Deputy Editor of TJ and I host the Training Journal webinars. You don't need to know about me though, because it's all about the session that you're interested in. This is a quote that I've used since we started these webinars from the late great Jay Cross, and he said that conversation is the most powerful learning technology ever invented. So I think that's what we're doing on our discussion webinars. If you've been on our discussion webinars before, you will know that it's all about the conversation. What we have is that our speakers, they don't have any presentations, they don't have to kind of put anything together. It's just a conversation like we're at a conference having a coffee, or as if you've been before, you'll know my favourite bit is in the pub afterwards. That's what we are doing, and that's what I want you to get involved in today. And that's what the chat window is for. So please use that to chat with each other, to chat with us, to share thoughts and comments. If you've got a blog, or you know of a piece of research or an article that somebody has written, please share it, or a video, anything like that. If it's yours, it's more than welcome. This is all about sharing and learning and what's going on. Please do share those in the chat window. Now at the bottom of the screen, we have a question and answer pod. If you want to make sure for 100% certain that I'm going to see your question, just pop it in the question pod at the bottom. I'll probably see most of them in the chat, but if you want to be sure, then that's what the question pod is for, and we will do our absolute utmost to get those answered. You can also join us on Twitter, #TJwow, and the person who's going to be doing all of the tweeting, well, it's our esteemed editor, John Kennard. He is going to be doing all the tweeting as per normal. So do go and follow #TJwow, and you can keep up to date with that, and do share with other people what are some of those nuggets you are taking away about learning transfer. As you know, everything is recorded on our website, and you can go and have a look at all of those, and we've got quite a backlog for you to go and have a look through and see all of the different things that we've been up to. I think that's it for now. You know all of that gist by now if you've attended before, and if you're new, then welcome. Please do get involved in the chat window. And you're chatting away with each other and making connections and stuff already. Jennifer and Bethany not living far from each other. So that's absolutely great news. So who have we got today? We have Emma, we have Ina, and we have Paul. And we're really lucky to have these three people, because as far as I'm concerned, if I wanted to know anything about learning transfer, I would go to one of these three people. So without further ado, let's get our videos onto the screen. Here we go, so that we can start seeing all of these lovely people. We have a couple of squished webinar cameras today, but we won't kind of mention which ones. And what we're going to do is just say some hellos and introduce ourselves. So we're going to go round and start with Emma, then Paul, then Ina, and we'll get them off mute and just find out. So Emma, who are you? What do you do? And where in the world are you, please?
Lovely to be here this evening, Jo. My name's Emma Weber. I'm from Sydney, Australia. My organisation is called Lever Transfer of Learning. We can be found at transferoflearning.com. And basically, I'm a bit of a transfer of learning obsessive, I think, if there is such a thing. I don't know if that's a condition we should all be concerned about, but have been specialising in the transfer field for the last 15 years, very much enjoying it.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Emma. And also, it is Emma's birthday today, and she's joining us on her birthday. So Emma, happy birthday from us. I hope you've had a really lovely celebration. I know you've got some celebrations coming up. So thank you for joining us on your birthday. We're really appreciative of that.
My pleasure.
And let's come to Paul. Paul, let's get you unmuted and tell us, who are you and what do you do?
Oh, my name's Paul Matthews. My company's People Alchemy, and we do software in the learning field, and including software and learning transfer. And currently, I'm just finishing off a book on learning transfer. So that's my summer job, is to get that book out the door. Yeah, it's been a fascinating journey. Adding that to all the other stuff and writing, I've done an L&D and joining all the dots across a number of different areas. So yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you, Paul. And if you haven't seen it already, Paul writes quite a lot for TJ on our blog. And in the latest TJ, which you can see just over my shoulder here, he wrote a feature for us on that as well. So thank you, Paul. And then let's come to Ina. Ina, please get unmuted and tell us where in the world are you and what is it that you do and the translation of your company name.
Hello to all, I'm Ina Weinbauer from the Institute of Transfer Effectiveness. You pronounced it really, really well, Joe, so Transferwirksamkeit, Institute for Transfer Effectiveness, and we work on the interface between transfer research and transfer practice. So all we do is making scientific findings of transfer research usable for practitioners.
And that's a really useful point, the usable for practitioners. That's, I think, what we're going to be focusing probably very largely on today. So let's go into that first question, which is how do we ensure learning transfer from training? And I just want to go back through our speakers. We'll go to Ina, then Paul, then Emma first, and just see what's your first couple of thoughts to get us going on this conversation. So Ina, first of all, how do we ensure learning transfer? What are your first thoughts to get us started?
So maybe I would talk about 3 points. So the first thing is start with the end in mind, with business impact and critical behaviors defined. Second thing is don't hope for transfer, really manage it by addressing all the important factors, or as I call it, the 12 levers of transfer effectiveness. And last but not least, question existing training routines, because quite a few of those common practices are actually transfer barriers. So that would be my first 3 ideas maybe.
Wonderful, thank you. I really like the point about, well, some of what we do actually gets in the way of it. So we should probably come back to that a little bit later on. And Con is already saying, don't hope for transfer. Well said, Ina. So thank you very much, Con. So Paul, let's come to you about this topic of how do you ensure learning transfer from your training? What's your starter for 10?
Well, there is a magic solution, you know, it's called pixie dust. If you have lots of pixie dust, you can sprinkle it on your delegates and they will leave the training room totally operational and fully able to do everything that you've taught them to do. The problem is most L&D people are fresh out of sacks of pixie dust, so we don't have that as an option anymore. So we have to, as Ina says, start with the end in mind, and then we have to make sure that they're doing things afterwards, because they're not going to leave the training room fully operational. So it's clear there's more to do after the training. And that's really what has to happen. You've got to focus on proactively managing that whole process, not just the event, but the whole process.
Absolutely. And Emma's saying, I want pixie dust, and Rachel's saying, I knew I'd lost something. Brilliant. Thank you, Paul.
Yeah, it's sad. There's not a great supply left in the world today. So, yeah.
I've got a little bit left. I don't know if you can see it here. There we go. There's some pixie dust for you. Okay, so assuming, Emma, that we can't use pixie dust, if we've run out and I've got the last of the world's supply of pixie dust, what are your thoughts about how we ensure kind of learning transfer from our training?
Well, I really concur with Ina and Paul in saying, you know, hope is not the strategy. You have to create a plan. But I think one of the interesting things is often in the past we've tried to perhaps create transfer through control and compliance and sending out additional content and thinking that the behavioural change is still about the content. So when I'm thinking about transfer, I always say that behavioural change piece is about the context and really thinking about the context that that person is operating in. And we really need to approach it with curiosity and creativity rather than this whole idea of control and compliance. So I'd sort of say that's a bit of a starter for 10. You need to have a strategy and a plan, but you can't over manage it and try and approach it with a sort of a big compliance hammer, because that won't work either.
Tell us a bit more about that content versus context, because so many L&D people, and I probably include myself, we're all about the content, about writing this, recording this, presenting that. So tell us a bit more about maybe where we're going wrong or where we can transfer our energy, if you like.
So I think the focus on content, it's an important starting place because there are certain things that people need to know, and there's content within learning programs for sure. But you really need to make sure that that content is applicable to the individual's context. But as you start to get people to change, it's no longer about the information. People can look things up in Google, they can look things up in their workbook, their manual, whatever that content was from. It's often not forgetting or not knowing the content that's the barrier to transfer. It's something else going on. So for behavioral change, it's really about the context that that individual is operating in, the context that they live and they function, the way they think about things. And I just think we have to start to think about that way more than us worrying what we know and our context of what we're trying to share.
Okay, interesting. Thank you. So that's something we need to kind of just shift a little bit, is our content is important, but we need to think broader than that. Thank you, Emma. Now, Ina, you mentioned sort of at the beginning that some of the things that we might traditionally do could be barriers to learning transfer. Can you give us a few examples, please?
Of course. So maybe one of the examples I like most is the certification process. So it is quite common that at the end of a training program, participants receive a certificate, which kind of marks the official end or the finish line of the training program. But if you look at this really, really critically, we will see that, what we certify there is quite often just physical presence. So our participants received the certificate when they were there in the training room for the intended time. And this has nothing to do with transfer at all. So instead of certifying physical presence, we should certify, or we could think of ways of how we could certify really transfer success. And you can do this really easily, for example, by having your participants do a presentation on how they have implemented what they have learned. And you do those things best in front of the supervisors, or even if it is a mission critical program, in front of the management board. And for this presentation of what they have successfully implemented, they then receive the certificate. This is just one idea. There are several more, and it addresses the so-called levered transfer expectation within the organization. As we know from research, it is really important that everybody in the company knows that transfer is expected, that transfer is the finish line and not the door of the classroom. So one example.
Yeah, thank you, Ina, for that. It's a really good example. And Paul, what I'm hearing from Ina is this is a little bit about training and about how we do that, but actually it's a little bit broader, and maybe it comes into things like culture and command and control. Is that true? And if so, how can we tackle some of that stuff?
Totally true. I think the culture angle is a very big one. And I think, Emma, you're right about the command and control is not a way to go and do it, any more than trying to promote informal learning through a command and control approach. But the culture is critical. I remember sitting with the head of L&D in a training center once, and a whole lot of people came out of different training rooms to go for their afternoon break. And I asked this guy, I said, if I went and asked those delegates what would happen if they did not do anything with what they've just learned, what would their answer be? And he looked very sheepish, and he said their answer would be, there would be no consequences. So effectively they were coming out. The training itself was mandatory, but the delivery of any ongoing work to make sure that training had an impact was not mandatory. It seemed to be completely optional. And in fact, people would have not been in any way inconvenienced by just doing nothing. So it just seems a very strange thing that we'll spend money on only a small part of the process and not on the whole process.
So what are some of the things that you're thinking that would, if not solve that problem, but would work towards challenging it or making an impact in a positive sense?
I think one of the things is the expectations we give to people about the program. And very often you'll say, everybody's got to go on a one-day course on XYZ. And I think that's a really bad thing to do, because as soon as you tell people it's a one-day course or a one-day training event or a one-day thing, they will set aside in their mind 1 day of time to go and get that done. But what we do know is that actually it's probably a 3 or 4 or even a 5-day program that needs to be spread over 6 months. For example, 1 day of which happens to be in the classroom. There's probably a bit of stuff to do before the classroom and then a whole lot of stuff afterwards to practice and experiment and start getting some sort of handle on these skills so that people then can start doing them, through that whole transfer process. So you need to be marketing it as maybe a 4-day program and 1 day of that's in the classroom. So you're setting expectations on the amount of time that people are going to have to input into the program in order for it to be effective for the organization.
Yeah, you got some really good points there, and I'm sure we can dig deeper into that as the conversation unfolds. Emma, what are your thoughts on that point?
Interesting when we think about this whole piece of a training that's mandatory or a learning event that's mandatory, and often what we're doing is we're evaluating the success, as Ina said, when someone has actually turned up. And really, it's just heartbreaking that as professionals we're using that as a KPI or a measure as to whether someone's been there. So I think we have to extend it. But I think to Paul's point of learning and development being involved in just a small part of a bigger intervention, I think we need to look at an organization's learning maturity to really start to say, okay, does learning need to broaden the part that we're playing in the intervention, or have we got managers and leaders that are already able to help with that transfer? So I've started playing around with this idea of learning maturity within organizations to then sort of look at, okay, well, this is the different type of transfer processes we've put in place. Because at the end of the day, if you're trying to shift behaviors, you need to shift the behaviors. It doesn't matter whether learning's very actively involved or not very actively involved, as long as you get the outcome.
Some interesting points there, and great conversation going on in the chat window as well. We're starting to see lots of things coming through. Now, if you're new to the Training Journal webinar, please do get involved in that chat window. Just a small comment or an I agree or a not sure. You're more than welcome to do that. So Con Learn-Koch says, recently at a keynote in Australia, RJ Pangakar referred to a story where he stopped sending people to training and defied his manager. He was asked to explain. His response is, training is taking away from productive time. As productivity was not improving after the training, then transfer was not being displayed. And Con, thank you for sharing that and for sharing RJ's story. I've heard him say that too. And what this is all about, this is saying, well, if we're not getting an improvement, and this comes to measurement, and we've got a question about this we'll come to later, then, we're not doing our jobs properly. So Ina, let's come to you on Rachel's comment. She says, we aren't good about describing for our learners and organisations what is really needed for the learning. For example, the non-face-to-face bits of learning, the pre-work, the homework, all of the other parts that we might design. What are your thoughts on that, Ina, in terms of maybe our skills or what the organisation needs or another element of that?
So what we know from transfer researchers is that there are several things really important from the area of the organisation. So the first thing, and Rachel has already commented on that one, is the support from superiors. So we cannot expect transfer to happen when we don't have our superiors on board. The next thing we need there is also the support from peers, especially if you have a very low hierarchy in your organization. Your participants won't turn to their supervisors, but to their peers in order to have their new behaviors appreciated or get feedback on that. So you also have to think about them. This is what Paul and Emma already talked about when they talked about the context. The other thing is the opportunity to use. So when people come back from their training programs, they have to find resources and situations there where they can actually apply what they have learned. And there we have a big issue, as it is quite common to kind of solve every organizational problem by doing training. because this is just a really, really common thing. We know how training works, and somehow we think we can solve all issues. But for example, if you think about having a burnout problem in your organization, quite often a burnout prevention training is not the right solution for that. So training can be a really, really good thing, but I have the opinion that we do training much too often. And I think we should save resources here and really use training only when it is a question of skills, and only when we have the right surroundings, superiors, peers, and so on board.
It makes perfect sense that we have a strength, which is our training classes, however that might work and whatever way we might do that for ourselves, our organisation, and that actually we're probably overdoing that strength a little bit, and an overdone strength becomes a weakness. So that's a really interesting point there, Ina. Thank you. So Paul, let's come to you for this question. This is from Bethany Taylor. Thank you for your question in the chat pod, Bethany, or in the question pod, I should say. Bethany says, Paul, how do you communicate the need of the longer training times across to the higher ups, to the senior managers, maybe the department managers? So we know things should be done differently, but how do we get other people to actually sign off on that? What are your thoughts?
This is back to something Emma Webber did mention earlier about a cultural issue, really. That's where your biggest barrier is to getting that. And what I would also is not call it extra training time. I would call it a development program. And it has some goals at the end of it, which again, it's not about the learning, it's about what people do with what they've got. So it's not about the message, it's what people do with the message. So it's really important, again, start with the end in mind, focus all of that and saying in order to get these changes, we need to put in place a program. And that program is going to consist of these things, some of which, if you've determined it's the right thing to do, and Ina's just said it sometimes isn't, is to put them in a training room. So one of the things you've got to do up front is get very clear about your performance diagnostics in order that you've sort of totally convinced people that actually a learning intervention is going to be useful as part of a program to fix this performance problem that you're looking at it. Otherwise, you're not going to get relevance of the material to the people. And also, you're not in a position really to seek that longer term program over a period of time. But a lot of it is just calling out common sense. I think a lot of people seem to think that exposure to content in a training context equals learning, and learning equals behavior change, and behavior change. Now, those aren't equivalent. Just because you've exposed someone to content doesn't mean they've learned anything, and even if they've learned anything, doesn't mean they're going to do anything with it. So a moment's reflection is simple, but people just seem to walk into a lot of this stuff sleepwalking and just demand training. And that's part of the challenge, is trying to upset that mindset, and that will be there in companies until they evolve on their learning maturity scale, which is what Emma was talking about. And that will come with time, but it can take some work to shift that learning culture.
Yeah, and Rachel's sort of just commenting, you know, the spray paint model of training, which is a very polite way of putting that, Rachel. I've heard of less polite ways of saying that. And Neil Anderson made a comment in the chat earlier on, agreeing with Ina, I think, saying, absolutely agree that we need to stop the certification at the end of the course and the one-day mentality. The classic is the pre-course work, which doesn't get done. If people turn up not having done it, they need to know there are actual consequences. And Ina is right that we need support from all levels, and that's that kind of discussion that we're having now. And I know I've got to the point of advising people when they're designing courses, because I'm perhaps advising an L&D instructor or instructional designer or trainer, and saying, don't put in pre-work because people probably aren't going to do it. Do it as homework when it's more likely to get done. Now, that's a very different conversation when you are talking then to senior managers or the people who are kind of looking at that whole culture piece and getting everyone involved. That's a different recommendation, but it is definitely a challenge. Okay, so Emma, let's come to you, because I think this comment from Kath Bird in the question pod, thank you, Kath, says we're really aiming for performance improvement, huh? We do, though, need to be able to measure it, which is always tricky. Any thoughts on that element going from culture and those senior managers and measurement, and kind of bringing those two together?
It's tricky, but there are different ways to do it. What I've seen with organizations is, first of all, you have to create the distinction for people that transfer is not measurement. They're two separate parts to it. So sometimes people think just because they're measuring it, that is the transfer. The measurement assesses whether the transfer has happened, but you need a separate strategy to actually create the transfer in itself. So the two go hand in hand, but it's clarifying that they're different. It comes back to that whole idea of what are we trying to achieve? What are the behaviors that we're looking to be put into place? Make sure they're behaviors that can be seen, and then think about how can we actually measure it. I've had a couple of instances where we've been commissioned to do a transfer piece and an evaluation piece, but once the leaders in the organization were actually seeing people change in front of their eyes almost, they said, no, don't worry about the investment in the transfer, in the evaluation piece, because we're seeing people change. So I think some of the time people are wanting evaluation because they're not sure if they're getting the transfer. Whereas if they really see people change, they're less worried about having the specific numbers or metrics actually on that particular intervention. And I think what will be interesting to see is how sort of big data and analytics and, the access we now have to data about people will start to influence the measurement of learning. So we're certainly sort of investigating in that area. And of course, there's a lot written about the different, the 5 levels, whether you work with the ROI Institute or Kirkpatrick scales. So there are different ways to tackle it. And of course, case studies. We've also had clients, when we use a Brinkerhoff type method, just love the fact that they've got individual stories from a group saying how they've actually applied. A bit like Ina was saying, get people to present those back, that it's actually not about presenting the learning or what they learned, but what they've done with it and what they're going to do on an ongoing basis. I know that doesn't solve it, Jo, but hopefully that's food for thought a little bit.
I'm not sure we're going to solve anything in an hour discussion on a webinar, unfortunately, much as I would love to be able to do that. But yeah, you're right. If we can share some ideas and thoughts and get people going and use that chat window to say, well, this is what I did and it worked really well, or this is what I did and it didn't work really well. It was a disaster. All of these things are good to learn. And Sarah says, great point, Emma. The problem with my organisation is they want stats, but trying to influence actual stories says so much more. So it's that combination of things, isn't it, is really important. And Kath says that's a great distinction to make, i.e. between the transfer and the measurement. Emma, it's a useful question to ask up front so that it's not blurred. Brilliant. Thank you for your comments there and for your conversations that are going on too. Ina, let's come to you with a question from Rachel Burnham. Thank you, Rachel, for putting your question in the question pod. Rachel asks, I would like to hear more about the 12 levers of learning. So we may or may not have time to go through all 12, and if you've got a paper or a blog or something to link to, that would be great. But can you just tell us a little bit some of the key ones, or where they came from, what the research is based on? Tell us a bit more, please.
The 12 levers are nothing else than a practical solution or translation of more than 100 years of transfer research. I had a transfer problem myself and I wanted an answer. And transfer research has a transfer problem, because they claim that what they have found out is not used by practitioners. Up to now, we have more than 100 factors which show the correlation with transfer, and no practitioner ever can work with 100 factors. So what we did was reducing those factors and just focusing on those which can be controlled and managed by interventions from HRD or L&D professionals. And we ended up with the 12 levers. They are separated in 3 areas. So trainees, they have 3 levers there: motivation, volition, and self-efficacy. Training design, those are the things which are quite common or which are quite well known. And 5 levers within the organization, as I said before: peers, supervisors, opportunity to use, transfer capacity, and transfer expectation within the organization. And what you can do with, so kind of practically speaking, those 12 levers are exactly the questions you can ask yourself in order to make transfer happen. And you can implement tools on addressing those levers. So for example, support from supervisors, you can implement the well-known things like pre and post-training discussion between participant and supervisors to address this lever. And if you address all the 12 levers, you have a great chance to have a scientifically sound transfer concept for your trainings.
Thank you very much. We'd definitely love to hear some more about that at some point. Now, we've got Richard Gadd's question, which is something that's been puzzling us a little bit. I'll be honest with you, Richard. I'm sorry. We're not quite sure exactly 100% about your question, but I am going to see if we can tackle it in some way. So, and if anybody wants to kind of share more about that, please do. So Richard asks, in the traditional training model, we talk about assessing the requirement, designing the learning, and delivering the training, and assuring or evaluating the process. My effective learning assurance ensure knowledge transfer. So the bit that's confusing us, and I'll be honest, I'm not quite sure about this, is the learning assurance part of it. So it's not something I'm aware of or have come across very much in the past. And if you guys have, please help us to learn and tell us more in the chat window. I wonder if this is moving, by learning assurance, if you mean less of the compliance kind of area and moving more to that kind of improvement culture. That's certainly something that's the only thing my brain can come up with. Is looking at it from that point of view. And if that's something that you guys know about, please do let us know. So let me kind of see if I can reword the question. Is it about making sure, is learning transfer about making sure we go into continuous improvement? I'm going to reword the question that way. And if anybody else thinks differently, let us know in the chat window. We can always answer the question in a different way. So Emma, what do you think about this? Is learning transfer about continuous improvement?
I'm wondering from Richard's question is whether what he's saying is around when he's looking at learning assurance, he's actually evaluating that the oh, sorry. Have you got audio still?
Yep, carry on, Emma. Yeah,
Have we still got audio, Joe? Okay, good. Sorry about that, guys. So I'm wondering if Richard is talking about he's assuring that the knowledge has actually transferred, so that he's evaluating the way that he's created his learning intervention. But I think that the challenge for me is if you're only assuring whether the knowledge has transferred and whether people know it, and not whether people are actually putting it into place, I think we're falling short. And it probably makes us look like heroes, and we can go, yes, I have done my part, the learning is great, but I think we've got to change our mindset that our job is not to create the learning, the job is to create the behavioural change and the subsequent business impact. It's a personal view. I'm sure other people have got other areas, but I wonder whether that's the piece that Richard is talking about. So I just kind of throw that out there. Maybe Richard can.
Thank you, Emma. And we'll definitely kind of pick up on this, and Richard's typing away. Ina, you were kind of nodding away at this point, so tell us a bit more about what you think.
Yeah, I completely agree that we just cannot only think about knowledge, but we should really think about behavior change and behavior change which has an effect on organizational or on business stuff. And the other thing is that I think we should get rid of the idea that we as trainers or instructors, so in this role, can assure transfer. It is just not doable, as there are so many other context factors, as I said, those organizational levers, which also have to be put in place. So just blaming a trainer or a facilitator or asking them to kind of make a behavior change happen, that just doesn't work anymore, or has never worked so far. Maybe that's the more correct answer. So that was why I was nodding.
Thank you very much, Emma.
I'm not sure I fully agree though with that. And so
Absolutely.
just to have a discussion, obviously, because I think in a way, what we can then end up doing is sort of saying, look, there's so many factors and so many things to manage, it becomes almost too difficult and remains in the too hard basket. What we've found is where we can work individually with a participant, supporting them after they've attended learning over the phone, a coaching type-based methodology, so the one that's designed to work specifically in learning transfer but has coaching at its heart. If you really give the ownership back to the individual, most people want to apply the learning. They want to do a better job. They want to improve. So it's not, I think, this whole notion that people don't want to apply it. It's just that they get busy. So I think if we can really support individuals to apply it, often, although it's not ideal, they can end up sort of working against the system that they're in. So even if the system isn't supporting them, we can actually help them create the change and the transfer. And then as those people change, the system starts to change as well. So I think we need to almost tackle it bottom up and top down. But if we don't, put some bottom up things in place, we could be waiting a long while for that top down approach as well. So I just think there's different ways to approach.
Some really good points there from both of you. Thank you. And some stuff in the chat window. Sarah says, is it not like going on a diet? You have to stick at it or nothing changes. Richard on this whole discussion is saying too often evaluation focuses on an end of learning questionnaire and misses other key elements such as the impact on the business outcomes, which I think is that key there. And I commented in the chat that ADDIE can be like that. The ADDIE model, the E is for evaluation, and people often interpret that as evaluating at the end and not defining those measurements and stuff up front. So now we're getting into a conversation where Neil says, get managers to define what will satisfy them. So Paul, let's come to you on this one, because Rachel Burnham commented in the chat earlier on that the capabilities of managers are key. When we're delivering programs, we do need to think about how we prepare managers for supporting learners applying learning. If that's the context they're working in, underneath a manager who's supporting them, presumably, hopefully, in the business, is that the key, Paul?
It's one of the keys, and it's one of the 12 levers that Ina's been talking about, is the support of the managers. And you absolutely do need to often support those managers to then in turn support the delegates who are reporting to them. The issue there is that many managers don't have inbuilt or practice at the kind of skills that might be needed. So what you've got to do is support them in some way to do that. And you can do what Emma suggested and sort of help them become, bigger, better coaches in a sense. Another way that's perhaps not so cost intensive is to help them by setting up activities and things for them to do afterwards that are smaller and don't require the level of coaching skills that might be required. And part of that comes back to the behavioral work that BJ Fogg has done out of Stanford. If you can split things up into small pieces, then it's much easier for people to do them and for managers to support them while they're doing them. So I think that the other thing that's there that is kind of the elephant in the room is the culture in the organization. And that's been on the chat a few times. And somebody mentioned the Towards Maturity transformation curve model. It's a great report. I've actually got a copy sitting here, actually. I refer to this quite a lot, and I would highly recommend it. If you have a look at page 9, there's a table in there which talks about the learning maturity of an organization, and you'll see that managers get involved with learning at the upper levels of those transformation curves, not at the lower levels. So that's where you need to be moving, because we talked about culture earlier, and it does come back to culture. I've often asked managers, what's the job of a manager? And they will give me all sorts of answers, but the one answer I've actually very seldom ever heard, if ever, I think, is my job is to help the people on my team be the best they can be at the job they're doing. And very few managers actually have that as a prime directive, if you want to talk Star Trek speak, in the sense that if that's their prime directive and everything else a manager does is filtered through that prime directive of my job is to help the people on my team be the best they can be in the job they're doing, then actually management becomes a lot different. And then you will get the support. And the manager's supporting at two levels, by the way. One is supporting the individual with whatever post-training activities are required for experimentation and practice and embedding, and then ultimately behavior change. And the second way is the manager must be supporting the environment that's surrounding that person in order to allow all that stuff to happen and permit it and promote it to happen. So yeah, the manager's got a major role to play. There's no question of that.
Thank you, Paul. And Bethany says plus 1,000, Paul, which means she really agrees with you. Con says Laura Overton, who's works or whose baby is towards maturity, who wrote the report, said Laura Overton once referred to managers as the holy grail of any learning transfer. Thank you, Con. And Neil says courses are just a small part of the whole transfer process. Well said, Paul. I'm going to give you a plus 1,000 on that too. And Emma, I know that you place a lot of stock in the managers in terms of learning transfer. So let's just have a couple of thoughts from you on that point.
So I think certainly, the manager, if we can get the manager supporting and helping that individual move forward and change, fantastic. I think having some sort of plan that they're moving towards, whether that's, as Paul mentioned, experiments or ideas. I love the idea that the individual actually develops their own experiments and ideas, and they choose what is most important for them individually as they come out of the process. We have a big mission to help make the difference to learning transfer worldwide. So we've created a free action planning tool, and you can get a copy of an action plan emailed direct to a manager from the participant at the end of a program as well. I'll put that in the chat box in a moment. So I think the more we can actually kind of create that link between the end of the program and the manager, the better. For some, it depends on the maturity of the managers and what actually skills and knowledge they have to be able to help people change. So, as Ina alluded to, there's lots of different factors in this.
Yeah, there really are, and I'll go and find if you can find that link you were mentioning, we can share that in the chat. That would be absolutely great, because I'm sure people would find that useful. Thank you, Emma. And Ina, I just wanted to come to you on this before we go into our reflection and have a look at it from your point of view. And what I've done is I've just really quickly loaded this 12 levers research that you've got here. So I've just got this on the screen for a moment. And if you look at the right-hand side, the yellow, which is what we're talking about here for the organisation, you're talking about support from the supervisor, from peers, to apply what we're doing, having a look at what we can do personally, and the expectations in the organisation. So I shared a link to this earlier on, and Emma shared the turning learning into action, which is brilliant. And so tell us a bit more in terms of what's going on for those 12 leaders, for the organisation and for the manager, Ina.
Yeah, so what you see here is the tool we use to develop transfer concepts. It's called the transfer matrix. You can play around with it, of course, for free on the website. And you wanted to know more about the levers in the organization. Have I understood you correctly, Joe?
Yeah, so the levers in terms of the managers or supervisors and that culture piece.
Okay. So this is one of the most researched factors from all those levers, and it has proven again and again that you can't do training without support from superiors. Just because it is the superiors who appreciate things, who set your job targets and things like that, and the training department cannot do that at all. But from so the perfect thing would be that supervisors really support and hold people accountable for applying what they have learned, that they ask questions, that they try to find opportunities for application and so on. But from my experience, it's sometimes really, really hard to get them on board as they are quite used to kind of not that effective trainings. As you said before, Joe, then you get things like, yeah, it's just a waste of time. When my employees are in the training and not in my team, they don't work productively. So it is not that easy to get them on board. But in my experience, in this case, commitment beats bureaucracy. So instead of handing out those big forms which they have to fill in and having those really big discussions with their employees in a very formal setting, it works quite well with my customers to just send them some questions. So please discuss this and that with your participants. And we know from research that already a 15-minute discussion between supervisor and trainee before and after the training significantly increases transfer success. So my advice is, or what I have learned is that organizations should start with really, really small interventions, like making them go to have a coffee together or something like that. So something which really fits to the culture, and then share success stories. So if you as a supervisor support your employees with the training thing or with the transfer, then you really get better results, and it's in your interest that you get really, really good employees. So really start small according to what your company, what your supervisors can take, and focus on commitment on their needs. That works well in my experience.
You know what? I was talking away there with my mute on. I have to do it once per webinar just to make everyone else feel good about making mistakes. That's my excuse, and I'm sticking to it. What I was trying to say was, Emma, let's come to you for a last comment on that one, and then we'll go into our reflection.
Sure, and of course we don't want to eat into our reflection time, because that is when we will start the transfer process. But I just wanted to build on what Ina had said. We did a survey, I did it with Lentham and the Sussex University of Sussex a couple of years ago, 270 respondents. And where organisations had managers coaching at every level, every learning transfer indicator was at least double. So it speaks to the culture and the type of managers and leaders that you already have in an organisation. And I think also Sarah asked a question earlier on about getting managers on board. And again, I'd concur with Ina, just take small steps. So take a small initiative to really deliver great transfer, so people can start to see what good transfer looks like, what it really means when they get outcomes. And then you can start to create momentum from there, I think, within your organisation.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. So we're going to go into our reflection now, for sure. It's really important. And there's some good stuff going on in the chat window. Con sharing something about performance story reporting. So thank you very much for that, Con. So we're going to come off webcam, but our speakers are staying here. They're still going to be chatting about stuff. So let's just wave a quick visual goodbye. But we are still going to be staying on the session and chatting about things. So let's come into our discussion now and see what's going on. We're going to do a quick practice to make sure we can use the tools. So have a look on your screen. What you should be able to see is a T-text tool. So please click on that, click on the screen, just type your name and click away, and it should reveal it to everyone else. Now, the only person that won't be able to see that is Sarah. Sarah Henshaw, you won't have that because you're on a tablet and you don't have the text tool on a tablet device. But Sarah, if you just type into the chat window when we get to the question in just a second, then I'll make sure to include that and put it on the whiteboard for you, so you are not left out at all. So you should be able to go and click on the T-text tool, click on the screen. I can see Rachel's name, and type your name. Thank you, Richard. And then the important bit is you click away afterwards. Thank you, Marta. Now, if you're thinking, oh no, it's on top of someone else, the very first tool on the toolbar allows you to pick up and move things around. Thank you, Emma. Thank you, Liz. So let's just make sure this is working first of all. You can move my colours around as well if you want to. Thank you, Learn Koch. Thank you, Kath. Thank you, Neil. Okay, we've mostly got this working now, which is absolutely brilliant. So let's go into our actual question. What is your action point from today's discussion? From all the stuff that we've gone through and thought about, what is it you are actually going to do? Either immediately afterwards, or it could be, later on today, could be tomorrow. What is it you're immediately going to go and do? So just use that T-text tool, type on the screen and click away. And if it's over the top of someone else's, we can move it. And Sarah Henshaw, if you want to add something, please just type it in chat and I'll make sure it gets on the whiteboard for you. You just don't have the text tools on a mobile device. Oh no, somebody has cleared the whiteboard. So one of our presenters, I think, is probably having a little play. Let me turn that back on again. So sorry about that, but we'll just carry on with just using that toolbar on the left. So it's back now. So some of the things that people are saying, let's start at the very top right. I think I'm going to focus more on building understanding for managers at all levels to break down the one-day event mentality. That's a really great share on that. I really like that. So thank you very much for sharing that. Read more about the 12 levers, share with L&D students, blog in a little bit. Absolutely wonderful. And please do blog about this under the hash TJwow, and we would love to retweet that from our training journal account and let us know. What have we got? Share with my team and start talking about how we can influence and look further at the models. Really good. Write a blog for TJ. You would be most welcome to write a blog for TJ, and you can contact John, our editor, at any time. He would love to share some of those. Engage with my learners line manager to offer tips on how they can support their colleagues and demonstrate their learning at work. Love it. Download the transfer matrix. Going to dig deeper into Ina's model. Mention all of this in my working out loud circle. Brilliant. Read through all the resources put in the chat, and they'll all be in the recording. You can click on all of those links. Read and absorb all the links, read the maturity report, some really good stuff there. Let's come to Emma, Ina and Paul just for some thoughts, some final thoughts really, on what you can see in this reflection. So Emma, first of all, loads of great stuff here. What's making you smile, Emma?
I think, the enthusiasm, and people are wanting to learn more and understand more. And I think as professionals, we know that this is an area we can do better, and everyone's, excited to move it forward. So, great job, everyone.
And what's your kind of takeaway, Emma, from the discussion? Because it's not just about what you provide people, which has been amazing, but what have you taken from the conversation today yourself?
Well, my action is at the bottom here. I'm the person who's going to dig deeper into Ina's model, so I want to know and understand more about that. So thank you, Ina, for sharing your expertise too. And Paul, keep up the great work. Looking forward to the book. So I think we can all learn from each other. Thank you so much for that, Emma. And Ina, let's come to you. There's some great reflections on this whiteboard we've got today about what people are going to do. What is it that you're seeing here that makes you happy?
For me, it's so great to see that there are so many people out there who are so passionate about this transfer topic. It would be quite easy to just leave everything as it is, because so far there are not so many companies who really say transfer is a burning issue, but it is mostly the courage and the engagement of L&D managers, L&D consultants, who just want to make more out of their training to feel more sense in there. And it is just great to see that people are interested in how to make transfer happen. This is great. And this is kind of makes me really smile right now.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah. And Ina, what is it that you are learning from today's conversation with everybody? What has it made you reflect on?
I think it is especially, again, the maturity report I was discussing with Paul earlier, that this idea of really thinking about how mature a company is, and therefore think about which transfer promoting tools could be relevant for these organizations. So not just think about those who are really, really advanced, but also thinking about the first steps you can take. This is kind of an idea which gets bigger and bigger in my mind, and which kind of makes my scientist heart kind of really, really pumping fast.
Wonderful, Ina. Thank you so much for that. And then lastly, Paul, what are you seeing here that makes you think, yes, people have got this?
It's great seeing all the activity, and as Ina said, she and I have been speaking a bit earlier about some of these things, linking it to the Towards Maturity work, and also thinking about how her 12 levers can be applied at two different levels, one at a more facilitator trainer level, and also something I get more involved with perhaps is more at a strategic level, and the cultural stuff involved with learning transfer. What I was surprised to see that was apparently not on the white, well, I can't see the whiteboard for some reason, I don't know why, but I don't think anybody mentioned they were going to send out a hit team to get the last of the pixie dust in existence from you. So I thought that was something that people missed there. But yeah, I think it's great. And what I am finding is certainly I speak a lot with heads of L&D in larger organizations and at a global level, just because of some of the other stuff I do. And I'm finding now talking about learning transfer being on their radar now, whereas a year ago they weren't really saying that. They were saying, yeah, we're discussing it, but now they're saying it's on our radar, we've got to do something. So it's senior L&D people are certainly starting to pay more attention to it, but of course it will take time for that to filter into the L&D parts of those organizations, particularly the bigger ones. But we're getting there, We
absolutely are, and it's partly thanks to all three of you that have been kind of waving this flag, and lots of other people, as Ina said, and as Paul has written about in his training journal article. I think this research has been going on for kind of 110 years, something like that. So it's really good that we're starting to look at this and really get these conversations going. So thank you so much to our three amazing speakers today. We've had Emma Weber from Lever Transfer of Learning. We've also had Ina Weinbauer-Heidel from the Institute for Transfer Effectiveness, and we've had Paul Matthews from People Alchemy. They've all been absolutely amazing. I think you'll agree. They've shared loads of links and resources. Please go and have a look at those on their websites. And Ina, I've only put your Austrian version of your website. I haven't put your English version. If you could share that again, please. I didn't grab that earlier on. And also it's thank you to all of you guys as well, because it's your conversation that makes this so amazing. And you know that all of our websites, all of our webinars are available online. You can go and have a look at those. Thank you, Ina, for that link that you have shared again. You can go and continue the conversation on Twitter if you want to. So please go and kind of just share about, well, what is it that you've actually learned today? What is it that you're going to do? What is it that you're going to change? So go and find some people on Twitter and continue that conversation. And our webinars in the future. We've got some more coming up. You know all about these, where you can go and register for them. And they're all like this, all the same format. So we've got next month is Understanding Business. September is Coaching and Mentoring. October is all about the customer experience, and November is Marketing L&D. So please do go and sign up for some of those. And as Paul says, all three of our speakers today are really happy to go and have a chat with you and share with you. They are very generous and very lovely. And you guys need to connect up and share with each other as well, because I know that you are all very lovely and very generous. So thank you very much. Paul has called me the last of the pixies. Yeah, 6'1" pixie. So thank you very much, everybody, for your time today. We really hope to see you in the future. Have a great day. Keep cool if you're in the heat. Keep warm if you're in the cold. And make sure that you keep learning transfer top of mind. Thank you very much and goodbye.